She was 78 years old when her own family decided she was easier to forget than to love. 3 months later, an entire county would be fighting over the truth hidden beneath a ranch no one was supposed to find. But on the night this story begins, Eleanor Whitmore owns nothing except an old coat, a weathered wooden box, and a memory she cannot let die. The rain falls steadily across western Montana, turning the narrow two-lane road into a ribbon of black glass. Cold wind moves through the pine trees with a low, mournful hum, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant cedar. Headlights disappear into the darkness, growing smaller and smaller until they are swallowed completely by the storm. Eleanor stands alone beside the road, her silver hair damp against her cheeks, her frail hands wrapped around a wooden box no larger than a family Bible. She watches the taillights vanish. She doesn't call out. She doesn't cry. Some heartbreaks happen too quietly for tears. Before we go any further, comment below what you would have done if you saw Eleanor standing alone in that storm. And subscribe if stories about loyalty, family, and second chances still matter to you. At 78, Eleanor has learned that silence often hurts more than shouting. The rain taps softly against the lid of the box. Inside are a few yellowed photographs, an old brass key, and a postcard she has carried for nearly 60 years. The edges are worn thin from being touched so many times. On the front is a faded photograph of a ranch surrounded by mountains. On the back, written in careful blue ink, are 6 words from her father. "If you are lost, come home." Eleanor closes her eyes. The words still sound like his voice. Strong, gentle, certain. Her father had mailed the card shortly before disappearing in the summer of 1968. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a postcard and a promise she never understood. For decades, she kept it hidden in a dresser drawer while life moved forward without answers. Marriage, children, work, loss, funerals, empty holidays. And now, after all these years, it's the only thing she has left. A pickup truck rushes past, spraying water across the shoulder. The driver never slows down. Eleanor pulls her coat tighter and starts walking. Her shoes sink into the gravel with each careful step. She doesn't know exactly where she is going, only that the address printed on the postcard exists somewhere beyond the mountains rising against the dark horizon. The temperature drops with every passing minute. The storm thickens. Clouds hide the moon. Yet something inside her refuses to stop. Maybe faith. Maybe stubbornness. Maybe the quiet belief that a person shouldn't disappear without learning why they were forgotten. Nearly an hour passes before she sees it. A weather-beaten sign standing crooked beside an old dirt road. Most of the letters have faded away, but one word remains visible beneath years of neglect. Whitmore. Eleanor freezes. Her heartbeat stumbles. For a moment, she wonders if exhaustion is playing tricks on her eyes. Then a gust of wind sweeps across the road, rattling the sign and sending pine needles skittering across the mud. The name remains. Whitmore. Her father's name. Her family name. The name no one has spoken with pride in decades. Eleanor takes a trembling breath and turns toward the road. The dirt path disappears into darkness between towering pines. Somewhere beyond them, hidden from the world, something waits. The rain softens. The wind settles. Even the forest seems to hold its breath. She grips the wooden box against her chest and begins walking toward the unknown. Behind the trees, beyond the hills, beyond the years of silence, an old ranch waits beneath the Montana sky. And unseen by Eleanor, another soul is already moving toward that same place. A German shepherd with amber eyes, guided by instincts no one will understand, is about to uncover a truth buried for more than half a century. The dirt road seemed to stretch forever through the darkness. Eleanor followed it slowly, one careful step after another, while the storm drifted farther into the mountains behind her. The rain had faded to a mist now, leaving tiny drops clinging to the pine branches overhead. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called once and then fell silent. The world felt suspended between memory and mourning. After nearly half a mile, the trees began to thin. Eleanor stopped when she saw the ranch for the first time. It sat in a wide valley surrounded by rolling hills and towering evergreens, hidden so completely that it felt removed from the rest of the world. Moonlight finally slipped through the clouds, revealing weathered barns, split-rail fences, and a large ranch house standing quietly beneath the Montana sky. Time had touched everything. Paint peeled from the wooden walls. Several fence posts leaned at odd angles. Tall grass swayed across the property. Yet beneath the years of neglect, the place still carried a strange dignity. Eleanor stared at it in disbelief. The postcard had been real. The ranch had existed all along. Her father hadn't imagined it. He hadn't lied. For the first time in decades, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. She approached the front porch slowly. The wooden steps creaked beneath her shoes. A rusty lantern hung beside the door. The brass handle looked untouched for years. Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and removed the old brass key from the wooden box. Her fingers trembled. It was impossible, she told herself. There was no reason a key carried for 60 years would still fit. Yet something deep inside urged her forward. She inserted the key into the lock. The mechanism resisted at first. Then came a soft metallic click. Eleanor froze. The door slowly eased open. A cold breath of air drifted from inside. Dust floated through pale moonlight filtering across the entryway. Tears filled her eyes before she even realized it. Home. The word arrived without permission. She stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of aged wood, cedar, and forgotten seasons. Furniture remained exactly where someone had left it decades earlier. A stone fireplace occupied one wall. Framed photographs sat covered beneath thin layers of dust. An old rocking chair faced a window overlooking the valley. Eleanor moved carefully through the silence. Every room felt preserved by memory, as if the house had been waiting. Then she noticed something unusual. On a side table near the fireplace sat a ceramic mug. It looked clean, not spotless, not new, but recently used. Eleanor frowned. Her eyes moved slowly across the room. Nearby rested a folded blanket. Fresh boot prints marked part of the hardwood floor. Someone had been here. Recently. The realization sent a ripple of uncertainty through her chest. She wasn't alone. Outside, a faint sound drifted through the night. A dog barked somewhere beyond the hills. Strong. Alert. Followed by another bark closer this time. Eleanor walked toward the front window and looked across the moonlit valley. Near a distant tree line, she spotted movement. A figure walked along a fence line, carrying a flashlight. Beside him moved a large German shepherd. The beam of light swept briefly across the grass before disappearing behind a rise. Whoever he was, he belonged here. Several miles away, Logan Hayes adjusted the collar on Ranger and studied the distant ranch house. A warm glow shined through one of the windows. He immediately stopped walking. Ranger stopped too. The German shepherd's ears rose sharply, amber eyes fixed on the valley below. For months the house had remained dark and empty. Tonight, someone had turned on a light. Logan narrowed his eyes. Ranger suddenly stepped forward. Then another step. The dog was staring directly toward the ranch, as though he sensed something neither man nor moonlight could explain. A cold breeze crossed the valley. Ranger's nose lifted into the air. He inhaled deeply and stood completely still. Then, for the first time that night, the German shepherd began pulling toward the ranch with quiet determination. By dawn, the storm had vanished completely. Golden light spilled across the valley, painting the ranch in soft shades of amber and silver. Eleanor had fallen asleep in the old rocking chair sometime before sunrise. Wrapped in a blanket, she found folded near the fireplace. The gentle creak of floorboards woke her. For one brief second, she thought she was a little girl again, waiting for her father to come home from the fields. Then reality returned. The ranch, the photographs, the strange evidence that someone else had been living here. She rose carefully and moved toward the front window. Outside, morning mist drifted across the grasslands like pale smoke. A pickup truck stood near the fence line. Beside it stood a tall man wearing a dark work jacket and worn blue jeans. Next to him sat a German shepherd. The dog was magnificent, large and muscular, with a sable coat glowing beneath the morning sun. His ears stood upright, alert to every sound. But it was his eyes that caught Eleanor's attention. Deep amber, intelligent, watchful. The dog was staring directly at the house, as if he already knew she was there. A few moments later came a knock at the door. Not loud, not demanding, just respectful. Eleanor opened it slowly. The man removed his cap immediately. He appeared to be in his late 30s, broad-shouldered and athletic. His face carried the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to difficult situations. A faded tattoo disappeared beneath the collar of his shirt. Another was visible along his right forearm. A German Shepherd. "Good morning, ma'am," he said. "I'm Logan Hayes. I live about 3 miles east of here." His voice was calm and steady. "I noticed lights in the house last night." Eleanor nodded. "I suppose I startled the neighbors." Logan smiled faintly. "There aren't many neighbors around here." His gaze moved briefly toward the old ranch house. "Truth is, nobody has lived here in years." Before Eleanor could answer, the German Shepherd suddenly walked past Logan and approached the porch. The dog moved carefully, almost respectfully. His nose twitched. He circled once around Eleanor, then stopped directly beside the wooden box she still carried. Logan frowned. "That's unusual." "What is?" Eleanor asked. Ranger doesn't normally take an interest in strangers. Ranger ignored both of them. His attention remained fixed on the box. He sniffed the brass key protruding slightly from beneath the lid. Then he sat down and looked up at Eleanor. His tail thumped once against the porch floor. Eleanor felt herself smile for the first time in many months. "Well," she whispered, "you seem friendly enough." The German Shepherd leaned gently against her leg. Logan stared in disbelief. "I have had him for 6 years. He has worked beside me every day. I don't think I have ever seen him trust someone that quickly." They spent the next hour talking on the porch while the morning warmed the valley. Eleanor shared pieces of her story. Not everything, just enough. She spoke of the postcard, the key, her father, the mysterious ranch. Logan listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. Occasionally his eyes drifted toward the distant hills as though fitting pieces of an old puzzle together. When she finally showed him the postcard, his expression changed. "Whitmore Ranch," he said quietly. "That name still appears on some of the oldest county maps." Eleanor looked up sharply. "You have heard of it?" Logan nodded. "Only stories. Most people think it disappeared decades ago." Ranger suddenly stood. His ears lifted. The dog looked toward an aging red barn sitting nearly 200 yards from the house. Then he began walking toward it without hesitation. Logan called his name once. Ranger didn't stop. The German Shepherd continued across the field, moving with a sense of purpose that immediately caught Logan's attention. "That's not normal," Logan said quietly. Together they watched Ranger reach the barn doors. The dog stopped, lowered his nose to the ground, then began scratching at the earth beneath the entrance, as if something hidden below had finally called his name. The old barn stood at the edge of the property like a forgotten sentinel guarding secrets too stubborn to die. Sunlight spilled across its faded red boards, revealing decades of weather and silence etched into every crack. Ranger continued scratching at the ground beneath the entrance, his focus so intense that neither Eleanor nor Logan spoke for several seconds. The German Shepherd wasn't acting playful. He was working. Logan recognized the posture immediately. He had seen it countless times during training exercises and search operations years ago. Ranger had found something. The question was what? Logan approached first, crouching beside the dog. The soil was softer than expected. Dark earth had recently shifted beneath the surface. Not yesterday, not last week, but sometime within the past few months. Ranger pushed his nose against the dirt and released a low whine. Eleanor stepped closer, clutching the wooden box. Against her chest, a strange feeling settled over her. Not fear, something deeper. The sensation that invisible threads were slowly pulling together after being scattered for half a century. Logan stood and examined the barn doors. One hung slightly crooked on rusted hinges. He pushed gently. The wood groaned. Dust floated through shafts of sunlight as the interior emerged from darkness. The smell of hay, cedar, and age lingered in the still air. Inside stood abandoned tools, empty stalls, and farming equipment untouched for decades. Yet something immediately felt wrong. The barn should have been buried beneath dust. Instead, several areas looked cleaner than the rest. Someone had walked through here. Recently, Logan noticed faint boot prints near the center aisle. Not many, just enough to suggest occasional visits. Ranger entered without hesitation. His nails clicked softly against the wooden floor as he moved deeper inside. Eleanor followed, her heartbeat quickening with every step. Along the far wall hung a collection of old photographs. Most had faded beyond recognition. One remained surprisingly clear. Eleanor stopped cold. Her breath caught. The photograph showed a younger version of her father standing beside a group of ranch workers. Behind them stretched the same valley visible through the barn doors. She reached out carefully and touched the frame. "That's him," she whispered. "That's my father." Logan studied the photograph. "He looks proud." Eleanor nodded slowly. "He loved this place." Her eyes glistened. "At least I think he did. He never talked about it after we moved away." Before Logan could respond, Ranger barked sharply. Once. Then again. Both turned immediately. The dog stood near an old workbench positioned against the rear wall. His attention remained fixed on the floor beneath it. Logan crossed the barn and inspected the area. At first he saw nothing unusual. Then sunlight shifted through a crack in the roof. A narrow metal edge reflected briefly beneath the bench. Logan knelt. His fingers brushed away dirt and dust. Metal. Not part of the floor. Not part of the bench. A small iron ring protruded from a wooden panel almost perfectly, concealed beneath years of debris. Ranger's tail moved slowly. Eleanor stared in silence. Logan gripped the ring and pulled. The hidden panel resisted before finally lifting several inches. A rush of cool air drifted upward from below. All three froze. Beneath the barn floor lay a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Eleanor felt the wooden box grow heavier in her hands. Her father had sent her a key. He had left a postcard. He had pointed her toward this ranch. Suddenly none of it felt accidental anymore. Logan shined his flashlight downward. Stone steps disappeared into shadow. The underground space was old, carefully constructed, deliberately hidden. Ranger stepped closer to the opening and sat beside it, waiting, watching, as though he had completed the first part of a mission only he understood. Logan exchanged a glance with Eleanor. Neither spoke. Outside, a gentle breeze moved through the valley grass. Wind chimes hanging from the porch sang faintly in the distance. Somewhere beyond the hills, the world carried on as normal. But beneath the barn floor, buried beneath decades of silence, something had just awakened. The hidden staircase seemed untouched by time. Cool air drifted upward from the darkness below, carrying the faint scent of stone, earth, and old wood. Logan directed his flashlight down the narrow steps while Eleanor stood silently beside him. Her fingers tightened around the wooden box. Every instinct told her that whatever lay beneath the barn was connected to her father. The feeling was impossible to explain, yet impossible to ignore. Ranger remained seated beside the opening. His amber eyes moved between Eleanor and the staircase as though waiting for a decision. Logan finally broke the silence. "We don't have to do this today." Eleanor looked into the darkness. For a moment she appeared very small against the vast history surrounding her. Then she shook her head gently. "I have spent 60 years wondering why my father disappeared. I think I have waited long enough." Logan nodded once. Together they descended. The stone steps were worn smooth by age. Dust coated the walls. The beam of the flashlight revealed an underground chamber, larger than either of them expected. The room stretched nearly 30 feet across. Heavy wooden support beams crossed the ceiling. Shelves lined the walls. Most stood empty. Others held weathered boxes, rusted lanterns, and stacks of old ledgers. The chamber felt less like a hiding place and more like a vault built to preserve something important. Ranger entered carefully behind them. His ears remained alert. His nose sampled every corner of the room. Eleanor moved slowly toward a wooden desk positioned against the far wall. A layer of dust covered its surface, yet one object immediately caught her attention. An oil lamp. Unlike everything else in the room, the lamp appeared relatively clean. Logan noticed it too. "Someone has been here." His voice was quiet. Not recently, but certainly within the last few years. Eleanor felt a chill despite the still air. The realization deepened the mystery. If someone had known about the hidden chamber, why had they left everything behind? Her gaze drifted across the shelves. Most boxes contained ranch records, faded receipts, and farming inventories from decades earlier. Then she noticed something carved into the side of a wooden crate. W.H. The initials stopped her cold. William Whitmore. Her father. With trembling hands, she opened the crate. Inside rested dozens of carefully organized notebooks wrapped in cloth. The fabric had yellowed with age, but the notebooks remained remarkably preserved. Eleanor lifted the first one. The leather cover felt familiar somehow. Personal. Logan shined the flashlight closer. On the front, written in faded ink, were 3 simple words. Property Journal. Eleanor slowly opened the cover. Her father's handwriting filled the first page. Neat. Precise. Unmistakable. Tears immediately filled her eyes. She hadn't seen his handwriting since she was a child. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. The words seemed to bridge 6 decades in an instant. Meanwhile, Ranger had wandered toward the far corner of the chamber. The German shepherd paused beside a large wooden cabinet built directly into the stone wall. He sniffed once, twice, then sat down. Logan noticed immediately. There he goes again. Ranger's behavior was becoming impossible to dismiss. The dog wasn't exploring randomly. He kept selecting specific locations. Deliberately, Logan crossed the room and examined the cabinet. At first glance it appeared ordinary, yet a closer look revealed something unusual. The hinges were newer than everything around them. Much newer. Someone had replaced them long after the chamber was built. Logan exchanged a glance with Eleanor. Neither said a word. Slowly he opened the cabinet doors. Inside sat several empty shelves. Nothing more. Yet Ranger refused to move. The dog continued staring at the back panel. Logan tapped the wood lightly. A hollow sound echoed through the chamber. His expression changed instantly. This shouldn't sound like that. Eleanor stepped closer. Her pulse quickened. Logan pressed carefully against the rear panel. At first nothing happened. Then a faint click echoed somewhere inside the wall. The wooden section shifted slightly. Not a cabinet. A hidden compartment. Ranger rose immediately to his feet. His tail moved once. The chamber fell silent again. Beneath the ranch. Beneath the barn. Beneath 60 years of unanswered questions. Another secret had just revealed itself. Logan carefully pulled the concealed panel open. Dust drifted through the narrow beam of his flashlight as a hidden cavity emerged behind the stone wall. The space was surprisingly small, barely 3 feet deep, yet immediately obvious that it had been built for something important. A single wooden chest rested inside. Nothing else. No decorations. No tools. No clutter. Just the chest. Time seemed to slow. Eleanor stared at it without moving. The rough pine boards looked old enough to belong to another century. Iron bands wrapped around the corners. A faded leather strap hung from one side. The sight of it stirred something deep inside her memory. "I know that chest," she whispered. Logan looked at her. "You do?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "My father used to keep it in his study when I was little. I thought it disappeared when we moved away." Her voice trembled. "I haven't seen it since I was 8 years old." Ranger stepped closer and sat quietly beside her. The German shepherd's presence felt steady and reassuring, as though he understood the weight of the moment. Logan carefully lifted the chest from the compartment and placed it on the desk. The wood groaned softly under its own age. Eleanor approached with hesitant steps. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the tarnished metal latch. For several seconds, she simply stared. Then she reached forward and touched the lid. Tears gathered in her eyes. It felt like shaking hands with a ghost. The latch opened easily. Too easily. As though someone had intended for it to be found one day. Inside lay several bundles of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. Beneath them rested old photographs, property maps, legal documents, and a leather journal much thicker than the ones found earlier. Eleanor carefully picked up the journal. Dust coated her fingertips. On the first page, written in the same unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words. For Eleanor Whitmore alone. Her breath caught. Logan remained silent. Some moments deserved respect more than conversation. Eleanor slowly turned the page. The ink had faded but remained readable. The first entry was dated May 1968. She read quietly at first, then aloud. "If you are reading this, it means I failed to return. There are truths about this ranch that powerful people wanted buried. I pray that one day honesty finds its way home." The chamber fell silent. Even Logan seemed unable to look away. Eleanor continued reading. Her father described disputes over land ownership, unexplained changes to official records, and growing pressure from individuals who wanted control of the valley. Yet the tone wasn't angry. It was careful, methodical. He documented dates, names, transactions, and observations like a man preparing evidence rather than accusations. Page after page revealed a story hidden beneath decades of silence. Then something slipped from between 2 pages and drifted onto the desk. A folded document. Logan picked it up carefully. His eyes narrowed. "This is interesting." Eleanor looked over. The paper appeared official. Stamped. Notarized. Signed. Logan scanned the contents twice before speaking. "This document lists acreage boundaries for the original Whitmore property." He paused. "And according to this map, The ranch is nearly twice the size recorded in modern county records. Eleanor blinked. That is possible. Logan's expression grew serious. Anything is possible if records were altered. Ranger suddenly rose from his place beside the desk. His ears lifted. His attention shifted toward the staircase leading back to the barn above. A low rumble vibrated softly in his chest. Not aggression. Alertness. Logan immediately noticed. The former SEAL trusted the dog completely. Ranger had warned him before, never without reason. The German Shepherd walked toward the stairs and stopped, listening. The underground chamber seemed colder now. Logan switched off his flashlight for a moment. Faint sounds drifted from somewhere above. A vehicle engine, distant but approaching. Eleanor closed the journal slowly. After 60 years, answers were finally beginning to surface. Unfortunately, it appeared they weren't the only ones searching for them. Logan extinguished the flashlight and listened carefully. The distant engine drifted across the valley, growing slightly louder before fading again behind the hills. Whoever it was hadn't reached the ranch yet, but Ranger's reaction made one thing clear. They couldn't assume they were alone anymore. The German Shepherd remained motionless at the foot of the staircase, every muscle focused on sounds beyond human hearing. Eleanor gently closed her father's journal and pressed it against her chest. The weight of the book felt different now. It was no longer merely a collection of memories. It was evidence, proof that William Whitmore had been trying to preserve something important before he vanished from his daughter's life. Logan gathered the maps and documents from the desk. "We should move these to the house," he said quietly. "If there are answers here, we need time to study them properly." Eleanor nodded. She looked around the hidden chamber one more time. For decades, she had imagined her father as a man who simply disappeared. Yet every page she had read painted a different picture. He had stayed. He had fought in his own way. He had hidden the truth where he believed it might survive. As they climbed back into the barn, sunlight poured through the gaps in the weathered boards. Dust shimmered in golden beams. The valley outside appeared peaceful, almost impossibly beautiful. Rolling grasslands stretched toward distant mountains capped with snow. A hawk circled high above the ranch. Nothing about the scene suggested secrets, missing records, or generations of unanswered questions. Yet beneath that peaceful landscape lay an entirely different story. Ranger exited first. The moment his paws touched the barn floor, he stopped again. His head turned toward the western edge of the property. Logan followed his gaze. Far beyond the pasture, near an old access road hidden among the trees, a dark SUV sat partially concealed beneath the pines. It was too far away to identify clearly, yet something about its position felt deliberate, watching rather than passing through. Logan narrowed his eyes. That vehicle wasn't there this morning. Eleanor looked toward the distant shape. A faint uneasiness settled over her. "Do you think someone knows about the ranch?" Logan didn't answer immediately. Years of military training had taught him caution. Assumptions could be dangerous. Facts mattered. Still, he trusted instincts when enough signs pointed in the same direction. "I think someone may be interested in this property," he finally said. Ranger released a low breath and continued staring toward the trees. The dog rarely focused on nothing. Back inside the ranch house, Eleanor spread the recovered documents across the dining table. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating pages untouched for decades. Property surveys, tax records, handwritten notes, correspondence between attorneys. As the afternoon passed, a pattern slowly emerged. Several land transfers listed in county archives appeared nowhere in William Whitmore's records. Entire sections of acreage had vanished from official ownership documents despite remaining clearly marked on the original maps. Eleanor traced one boundary line with her finger. "This cannot be right." Logan studied the papers beside her. "Your father documented every parcel carefully. These records are detailed." He pointed toward a notation in the margin. "Look at this date." Eleanor leaned closer. The entry had been written only weeks before her father disappeared. Beneath it appeared a single sentence underlined twice. "If anything happens to me, the truth remains beneath the valley." Silence filled the room. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Outside, the wind moved gently through the cottonwood trees. The sound was soft and peaceful. Then Ranger abruptly stood from his place near the fireplace. His ears rose. His amber eyes locked on the front window. A vehicle door had just closed somewhere outside. The sound came again. A car door closing somewhere beyond the front porch. Ranger moved first. The German shepherd crossed the room with calm urgency and stopped beside the window. His amber eyes remained fixed on the driveway. Logan quietly gathered several of the most important documents and slid them back into William Whitmore's journal. Years of experience had taught him a simple rule: protect the evidence first, ask questions second. Eleanor rose from her chair and joined Ranger at the window. A silver sedan sat near the entrance gate. An elderly man stepped out slowly, adjusting the brim of a weathered cowboy hat. He appeared to be in his 70s. Tall, lean, and sun-worn. The kind of face shaped by decades beneath open skies. He stood motionless for several seconds, staring at the ranch house as if seeing a ghost. Then he began walking toward the porch. Ranger didn't growl. He didn't bark. Instead, his posture relaxed slightly. Logan noticed immediately. The dog trusted his instincts more than appearances. If Ranger sensed danger, everyone knew it. This time the German shepherd simply watched. A knock sounded against the front door. 3 slow taps. Nothing threatening. Nothing hurried. Logan opened the door carefully. The old man removed his hat. His blue eyes settled on Eleanor. For a moment he seemed unable to speak. Then emotion softened his weathered face. "Good Lord," he whispered. "You look exactly like your father." Eleanor froze. The room seemed to tilt around her. "You knew William Whitmore?" The old man nodded. "My name is Walter Grayson. I worked this ranch when I was a teenager." Silence filled the room. Ranger calmly walked forward and sat beside Walter's boots. The old rancher smiled faintly and scratched behind the dog's ears. "Still the best judge of character on 4 legs?" he murmured. Logan invited him inside. Minutes later, they sat around the dining table, surrounded by maps and journals. Walter studied the documents carefully. His hands trembled slightly with age, yet his memory appeared sharp. When he saw William's handwriting, his eyes glistened. "I never thought I would see these again." Eleanor leaned forward. "Tell me what happened." Walter stared out the window toward the distant hills. For a long moment, only the sound of wind moving through the trees filled the room. Finally, he spoke. "Back in the late 1960s, your father discovered something hidden in the Valley records. Land that belonged to the Whitmore family was quietly transferred through a chain of companies that existed only on paper. Nobody could explain where the ownership went. Nobody could explain who benefited." He paused. "Your father started asking questions." Logan exchanged a glance with Eleanor. The pieces were beginning to connect. Walter continued. "William believed the original deeds still existed somewhere. He spent years searching." Eleanor opened the journal to one of the final entries. "He wrote that the truth remained beneath the valley." Walter's expression changed instantly. Then he found something. The old rancher leaned closer. "Because that was the exact phrase he used the last time I saw him." A chill passed through the room. Outside, afternoon clouds drifted across the mountains, casting long shadows over the grasslands. Ranger suddenly lifted his head. His ears rose. Not alarmed. Focused. The dog stood and walked toward the back porch door. He sniffed the air once. Then twice. Walter watched him carefully. "That dog smells something." Logan opened the door. A cool breeze entered the house, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Ranger stepped onto the porch and stared toward the northern pasture. Far beyond the fence line, partially hidden among cottonwood trees, stood a small stone structure nearly swallowed by vegetation. Eleanor followed his gaze. "What is that?" Walter slowly stood from his chair. His face had gone pale. "That," he said quietly, "is the old survey cabin." His eyes never left the distant building. And if William found what he was looking for, that is where he would have hidden it. The late afternoon sun hung low above the valley as they crossed the northern pasture. Golden light washed across the tall grass, turning each blade into a thread of fire. Ranger led the way without hesitation. His pace was steady, purposeful. The German shepherd moved as though he already knew where he was going. Eleanor followed beside Logan while Walter walked a few steps behind them. The old rancher seemed lost in memories. Every few minutes his eyes drifted toward distant landmarks scattered across the property. Places that had once been familiar before time buried them beneath silence. The survey cabin stood nearly half a mile from the main house. Years of neglect had allowed vines and brush to reclaim much of the stone structure. Yet despite its condition, the cabin remained standing, solid, unmoved by decades of storms and winters. As they approached, Ranger slowed. His ears lifted. His nose tested the breeze. Logan immediately noticed fresh tire tracks pressed into the dirt nearby. They weren't old. The edges remained sharp, recent enough to survive the previous night's rain. Walter stopped abruptly. Those weren't here last month. Logan studied the tracks carefully. They curved through the trees before disappearing toward the county road. Someone had visited the cabin. Recently. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. Every answer seemed to create another question. Ranger climbed the stone steps and stopped at the weathered wooden door. The dog looked back at Eleanor. For a brief moment, she felt the strange sensation that he was waiting specifically for her. The cabin interior was surprisingly intact. Dust covered most surfaces, but sunlight still filtered through narrow windows. An old drafting table occupied the center of the room. Shelves lined the walls. Survey maps hung inside cracked wooden frames. The scent of aged paper lingered in the still air. Walter moved slowly through the room. His fingers brushed across a rusted compass resting on one shelf. William spent months in here during the summer of 1968, he said quietly. Everyone thought he was preparing new property surveys. His eyes grew distant. Maybe he was preparing something else. Ranger immediately began searching. He moved from wall to wall, pausing occasionally before continuing. Logan watched closely. Then the German shepherd stopped beside an old stone fireplace built into the northern wall. His posture changed instantly. Focus. Intensity. The same behavior he displayed beneath the barn. Logan approached. The fireplace appeared ordinary at first glance. Cold ashes rested inside. The stonework seemed untouched. Yet one stone near the base looked slightly different from the others. Ranger touched it with his nose. Once. Then sat down. Eleanor knelt beside the hearth. Her fingers brushed across the stone's surface. Smooth. Worn. Deliberately shaped. Logan carefully pressed against it. A soft grinding sound echoed inside the wall. The stone shifted inward several inches. Walter inhaled sharply. Hidden behind the fireplace lay a narrow compartment containing a single metal box. Smaller than the chest beneath the barn. More secure. More deliberate. Eleanor stared at it in disbelief. The box carried the same initials carved into its lid. W.H. William Whitmore. Her hands trembled as she lifted it free. The metal felt cold despite the warmth of the room. Logan examined the lock. There's no keyhole. Walter leaned closer. Look underneath. Eleanor turned the box over. Attached to the bottom was a brass plate engraved with a familiar symbol. The exact same symbol carved into the old brass key she had carried for 60 years. Silence settled over the cabin. Outside, the wind whispered through the cottonwoods. Inside, generations of unanswered questions seemed to gather around a single moment. Eleanor slowly reached into her coat pocket and removed the key. The metal glinted softly in the fading sunlight. Somewhere beyond the cabin walls, a distant vehicle engine suddenly echoed across the valley once more. This time much closer than before. The distant engine echoed across the valley and then faded once more behind the trees. No one inside the survey cabin moved. Eleanor stared at the metal box resting in her hands. For 60 years, she had carried the brass key without understanding why her father wanted her to keep it. Now, standing inside a forgotten cabin at the edge of a forgotten ranch, the answer seemed only inches away. Her fingers trembled as she aligned the symbol on the key with the engraved plate beneath the box. A faint click sounded. Not from the front. From the side. Logan leaned closer. Hidden mechanism. Eleanor slowly pressed the plate inward. Another click followed. The lid released. Silence settled over the cabin. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Carefully, she opened the box. Inside lay a stack of documents wrapped in oilcloth, protected from moisture and time. Beneath them rested a sealed envelope bearing her name in William Whitmore's unmistakable handwriting. Eleanor felt her breath catch. Her eyes filled immediately. The letters seemed to pull her backward through decades. She touched the envelope gently before setting it aside. Some things deserved a moment of respect before they were opened. Logan examined the documents first. His expression changed almost immediately. These are original land deeds. Walter stepped forward. His weathered face grew pale. Good Lord. One by one, they spread the papers across the old survey table. Property boundaries. Ownership certificates. Survey records. County filings. Everything carried official seals and signatures. More importantly, every document supported the same conclusion. The ranch and thousands of surrounding acres had always belonged to the Whitmore family. Several transfers recorded in modern records didn't appear anywhere in the originals. Entire sections of land had been reassigned through paperwork that William clearly believed was fraudulent. Logan traced a finger across one map. This changes everything. Eleanor looked at the sprawling survey lines crossing the yellowed parchment. The property extended far beyond the ranch itself, through valleys, across grazing lands, into sections now controlled by various private interests. The scale was almost impossible to comprehend. Walter shook his head slowly. William was right. His voice cracked with emotion. He was telling the truth all along. Then Eleanor picked up the envelope. The room grew quiet again. She carefully opened it and unfolded the letter inside. The paper crackled softly with age. Her father's words appeared neat and steady across the page. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then time has carried you farther than I ever wished. First, forgive me. Every day I stayed away was a day I thought about coming home. But there were people who wanted these records destroyed, and I believed protecting them was the only way to protect our family. I could lose land. I could lose reputation. I could even lose years. But I couldn't lose the truth. Tears slipped down Eleanor's cheeks. She continued reading. I left clues because I believed one day you would find your way back here. Not for the property, not for the money, for something far more important. The truth belongs to those willing to carry it. If this ranch still stands, then hope still stands with it. The words blurred through her tears. Outside, clouds drifted across the setting sun. Warm amber light filled the cabin. For the first time in decades, Eleanor felt as though her father was speaking directly to her. Not from the past, from across a bridge built by faith and patience. Suddenly Ranger stood. The German shepherd walked to the window and stared toward the distant hills. His ears rose sharply. Logan joined him. Two vehicles were moving along the access road now, not passing through, approaching the ranch. Deliberately, Walter looked through the glass and his expression darkened. I recognize one of those trucks. Eleanor lowered the letter slowly. Who is it? Walter kept his eyes fixed on the road. People who have spent a very long time hoping these papers would never be found. The sky had begun to turn copper and gold as evening settled across the valley. Long shadows stretched over the grasslands while the approaching vehicles moved steadily along the dirt road. Dust drifted behind them like pale smoke. Inside the survey cabin, no one spoke for several moments. The discovery of the deeds had changed everything. The mystery was no longer whether William Whitmore had been telling the truth. The mystery was how many people had spent decades trying to bury it. Logan carefully gathered the original documents and placed them back inside the metal box. His movements were calm and deliberate. Years of experience had taught him that panic rarely solved problems. Preparation did. Ranger remained at the window, watching the distant road. The German shepherd's amber eyes never left the approaching trucks. Walter folded his arms and stared through the glass. The lead truck belongs to Clayton Mercer, he said quietly. Eleanor recognized the name immediately. Even after years away from Montana, she had heard it before. Mercer Holdings owned ranches, grazing leases, and commercial developments throughout the county. The company name seemed to appear everywhere. What does he have to do with this? She asked. Walter released a slow breath. A lot, if William's records are correct. Logan turned toward him. Explain. Walter nodded. Over the years, Mercer acquired land connected to the old Whitmore boundaries. Sometimes directly, sometimes through subsidiaries. Nobody questioned it because the county records appeared legitimate. His expression darkened. If those records were based on altered documents, then everything changes. The vehicles continued climbing toward the ranch. Still distant, still visible. Rangers suddenly turned away from the window and walked toward a far corner of the cabin. Logan watched him carefully. The dog's behavior had become impossible to ignore. Again and again, Ranger had led them toward answers hidden from everyone else. The German shepherd stopped beside an old bookshelf partially collapsed against the wall. He sniffed the floor once, then twice. Then he sat down. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Logan. Not again, she whispered. Logan smiled faintly. At this point, I trust him more than I trust luck. Together they moved the shelf aside. Dust billowed into the air. Beneath it lay several loose floorboards nearly concealed by decades of neglect. Ranger placed one paw gently against the wood. Logan knelt and lifted the first board. Beneath it rested a narrow compartment, smaller than the hidden spaces they had discovered before. Yet what it contained immediately caught everyone's attention. Inside lay a leather portfolio wrapped in oilcloth. Walter's eyes widened. "I remember that." Eleanor carefully removed it. The leather was cracked with age, but still intact. When she opened the portfolio, dozens of photographs slid into view. Black and white images, survey markers, property corners, legal meetings, land boundaries. Every photograph carried dates and handwritten notes. William Whitmore had documented everything. Then Logan found something even more important. Folded among the photographs was a certified survey report bearing official county signatures. The report confirmed the original Whitmore boundaries exactly as shown on the hidden maps. Walter stared at the document in disbelief. That report vanished in 1968. Eleanor looked up sharply. "Vanished?" Walter nodded. "People spent months looking for it." Silence filled the cabin. Outside, the first truck finally reached the ranch road below. Headlights glowed through the trees. Yet for the first time, Eleanor felt something stronger than fear. Hope. Real hope. Because every secret they uncovered pointed in the same direction. Her father hadn't hidden rumors. He had hidden proof. Ranger returned to her side and rested his head gently against her knee. Eleanor placed a trembling hand on the dog's neck. The warmth of his fur grounded her. Outside, powerful people were getting closer. Inside, the truth was finally becoming impossible to erase. By the time they returned to the ranch house, dusk had settled across the valley. The last traces of sunlight lingered along the mountain ridges while the first evening stars appeared overhead. The two trucks stopped near the front gate rather than approaching the house. Their headlights remained on, casting long beams across the pasture. Eleanor stood on the porch beside Logan and Walter, watching from a distance. Ranger sat quietly at her side. His presence felt less like protection and more like certainty. Whatever happened next, she was no longer facing it alone. A man stepped from the lead truck. Even from a distance, his expensive jacket and polished boots stood out against the rugged landscape. Clayton Mercer. Walter recognized him immediately. The businessman remained near the gate, speaking briefly with the driver of the second vehicle before turning toward the ranch. Yet instead of walking forward, he simply stood there looking across the property, looking at the house, looking at the land, looking at something he believed belonged to him. Logan folded his arms. Interesting. Walter glanced toward him. What? If he were confident, he would be walking up here. Logan's eyes never left the gate. He is waiting. Eleanor felt the truth in those words. For years, she had felt powerless, forgotten, pushed aside. Yet now something had shifted. The original deeds, the surveys, the photographs, the journal entries, and her father's letter all pointed in one direction. The truth was no longer hidden. It simply needed to be seen. Inside the house, the dining table had become a map of the past. Every document was organized carefully, every date cross-referenced, every property line compared. Logan spent hours photographing records and creating digital copies. Walter contacted an attorney he trusted in the county seat. By midnight, secure copies existed in multiple locations. The evidence could no longer disappear. Eleanor sat quietly beside the fireplace holding her father's final letter. The flames cast a warm glow across the room. Outside, the valley rested beneath a blanket of stars. She read the final paragraph again. My greatest hope isn't that you reclaim this land. My greatest hope is that you reclaim your place in this world. Property comes and goes. Truth remains. The words settled deeply within her heart. For so many years, she had measured herself by what she had lost. Her husband, her home, her family relationships, her sense of belonging. Yet sitting there in the ranch house her father built, she realized something important. The greatest thing she had recovered wasn't land. It was dignity. Early the next morning, the attorney arrived with county officials. They spent hours reviewing the original records. Signatures were verified. Dates were confirmed. Historical filings were matched against the recovered surveys. One by one, the conclusions became impossible to ignore. Walter stood near the window as the final review ended. Tears glistened in his eyes. William was right, he whispered. All these years. The lead county official removed his glasses and looked directly at Eleanor. Mrs. Whitmore, the evidence strongly supports your family's original ownership claims. These records should never have disappeared from the public archive. Silence filled the room. Not the silence of uncertainty, the silence that follows truth. Outside, morning sunlight spilled across the valley. Ranger lay peacefully near the porch steps, his head resting on his paws. The German shepherd opened one eye as Eleanor stepped outside. She knelt beside him and gently scratched behind his ears. The dog leaned into her hand. Across the pasture, the trucks were gone. The gate stood open. The valley looked exactly as it had the day before. Yet somehow everything was different. Because after 60 years of shadows, the truth had finally stepped into the light. 6 months later, spring arrived gently across the valley. Snow had retreated into the distant mountains, leaving behind emerald pastures, wildflowers, and clear streams that shimmered beneath the Montana sun. The ranch no longer felt abandoned. Life had returned. Fresh paint brightened the old buildings. Fences stood straight once more. The porch lantern glowed warmly each evening. And laughter, something the property hadn't heard in generations, drifted through open windows with the wind. Eleanor stood on the front porch watching the sunrise spread across the hills. At 78 years old, she felt lighter than she had in decades. Not because of the land, not because of the legal victories, not because county records had finally been corrected. She felt lighter because the questions that had followed her for 60 years had finally been answered. Her father hadn't abandoned her. He had protected the truth until the day she was strong enough to find it. That understanding healed wounds no court could ever reach. Ranger lay at her feet, stretched comfortably across the porch boards. The German shepherd had become something of a local legend. Visitors often asked about the remarkable dog who discovered hidden chambers, forgotten documents, and the clues that helped restore a family's history. Logan always smiled when he heard those stories. He never corrected anyone. Deep down, he believed Ranger deserved every bit of the credit. Some dogs chased balls. Some chased rabbits. Ranger seemed to chase truth. Beyond the pasture, several small cabins now stood near the edge of the property. They were simple but welcoming. Eleanor had chosen to use part of the recovered ranch income to create a place for forgotten souls. Retired veterans, elderly neighbors without family, rescue dogs with nowhere else to go. People and animals arrived carrying their own stories of loss. Most discovered the same thing. Healing often happened quietly. One conversation, one shared meal, one loyal dog resting beside a chair. Walter Grayson visited nearly every week. He spent afternoons teaching young volunteers about the history of the valley. Sometimes he sat beneath the cottonwoods and told stories about William Whitmore. Stories that had nearly vanished with time. Logan managed much of the ranch operation, though he preferred staying in the background. Recognition never interested him. Purpose did. For the first time since leaving military service, he felt connected to something larger than himself. Something worth building. One evening, as the sun settled behind the mountains, Eleanor walked toward the old barn. Ranger followed closely beside her. The air carried the scent of fresh-cut hay and pine. Wind moved softly through the grasslands. She entered the barn and descended once more into the hidden chamber beneath the floor. The space looked different now. Clean, organized, preserved. The journals rested safely inside display cases. The maps had been archived. Her father's letter remained exactly where she wanted it. Eleanor stood quietly before it. Then she smiled. "You were right, Dad," she whispered. The truth found its way home. Ranger sat beside her, watching with those calm amber eyes. For a moment, the years seemed to disappear. The grief, the confusion, the loneliness, all replaced by something far gentler. Grace. As darkness settled across the valley, lights began appearing one by one across the ranch. Warm windows glowing beneath an endless sky. Signs of life. Signs of belonging. Eleanor and Ranger returned to the porch where Logan waited with 2 cups of coffee. No one spoke much. They didn't need to. The mountains stood silent around them. Crickets sang in the fields. A distant wind chime danced softly in the evening breeze. Ranger rested his head against Eleanor's knee and closed his eyes. She looked out across the land her father loved and finally understood something simple. Some people inherit money. Some inherit property. And a very fortunate few inherit a purpose. Under the first stars of the night, surrounded by loyalty, friendship, and truth, Eleanor Whitmore finally felt at home.